That number used to be much lower. Thanks in part to conservation efforts, black bears are making a comeback.
By 1900, the Great Smoky Mountains had lost over 90% of their black bear population. What had once been home to thousands of bears roaming freely through ancient forests was reduced to scattered remnants hiding in the most remote corners of the mountains. Loggers dismissed the remaining bears as obstacles to progress. Hunters called them easy targets for sport. Local communities saw them as dangerous nuisances that threatened livestock and crops.
And a warning this morning for visitors at the Great Smoky Mountains National Park after recent bear attacks in places like Colorado and even Alaska.
The mountains themselves were dying. Industrial logging had stripped away 75% of the old-growth forests that bears depended on for food and shelter. Mining operations had poisoned streams and destroyed entire watersheds. Unregulated hunting had reduced the bear population from an estimated 3,000 animals to fewer than 200 survivors scattered across 800 square miles of increasingly fragmented habitat. There's no future for bears in these mountains, wildlife experts declared. The habitat is too damaged, the population too small to recover. Government officials argued that protecting the remaining bears would hurt the local economy and prevent necessary development. Even conservationists believed the damage was irreversible, that after decades of destruction, the Smoky Mountains ecosystem was too broken to support a viable bear population. But behind the scenes, something extraordinary was taking shape, quietly, patiently, and relentlessly. And what happened next shocked wildlife experts, government officials, and even the harshest critics of bear conservation. Welcome to Forgotten Lands, where we uncover the impossible transformations that changed everything. To understand the magnitude of what was accomplished in the Smoky Mountains, you need to see what these bears were up against. The Great Smoky Mountains had been one of the most biodiverse regions in North America, supporting not just black bears, but hundreds of other species in a complex web of interconnected ecosystems. The destruction began in the 1880s when large-scale logging operations moved into the mountains. Companies like the Little River Lumber Company and Elkmont Lumber Company systematically clear-cut entire watersheds, removing the massive chestnut, oak, and hemlock trees that had provided the foundation of the forest ecosystem for thousands of years. The American chestnut, which had made up 25% of the forest and provided crucial food for bears, was virtually eliminated by blight and logging. The habitat destruction was catastrophic. Bears need large territories. Adult males require 15 to 30 square miles of quality habitat, while females with cubs need 5 to 15 square miles. As logging operations fragmented the forest into isolated patches, bears were forced into smaller and smaller areas where they couldn't find enough food to survive or reproduce successfully. The hunting pressure was relentless. With no regulations or limits, hunters killed bears for meat, fur, and sport. Bear hunting was considered a rite of passage for mountain men, and entire families would participate in organized bear hunts that could kill dozens of animals in a single season. The bears that survived were the most wary and elusive, but even they couldn't escape the systematic destruction of their habitat. By 1920, wildlife surveys documented fewer than 150 black bears remaining in what would become Great Smoky Mountains National Park. The population was so small and scattered that successful reproduction was becoming increasingly rare. Cubs had difficulty finding mates when they reached maturity, and the genetic diversity of the population was dangerously low. The social barriers to bear recovery seemed insurmountable. Local communities had grown accustomed to viewing bears as threats rather than valuable wildlife. Farmers demanded the right to kill any bear that approached their property. Tourism operators argued that bears were dangerous to visitors and bad for business. Politicians dismissed bear conservation as an expensive luxury that would hurt economic development. These mountains are for people, not bears, local officials argued. We can't sacrifice jobs and progress for a few wild animals. State wildlife agencies had virtually no funding for bear conservation and little political support for protection efforts. Even within the scientific community, many experts believed that bear populations below 200 individuals were doomed to extinction, regardless of protection efforts. If you're amazed by stories of wildlife populations recovering against impossible odds, comment bears below and let me know what you think about conservation efforts that everyone said were hopeless. The transformation began in 1934 with the establishment of Great Smoky Mountains National Park. For the first time in decades, 522,427 acres of bear habitat would be protected from logging, mining, and unregulated hunting. But the challenges were enormous. The forest was severely damaged. The bear population was critically low, and there was no established science for managing recovering bear populations. The early years were discouraging. Bear sightings were so rare that park rangers went months without seeing a single animal. The few bears that remained were extremely wary of humans and stayed in the most remote areas of the park. Critics pointed to the empty forests as proof that bear conservation was a waste of taxpayer money. But park managers were committed to a long-term vision of ecosystem recovery. They began by focusing on habitat restoration, allowing logged areas to regenerate naturally, removing old mining equipment and debris, and protecting the remaining old-growth forest fragments that provided crucial bear habitat. They implemented strict hunting regulations and hired rangers specifically to protect wildlife. The breakthrough came in the 1940s when park biologists began documenting the first signs of bear population recovery. Female bears were successfully raising cubs in areas where no bears had been seen for decades. The protected habitat was allowing natural food sources like oak acorns, hickory nuts, and wild berries to recover, providing the high-calorie foods that bears needed to build fat reserves for winter hibernation. By 1950, the bear population had increased to an estimated 300 animals, still small, but showing clear signs of recovery. More importantly, bears were beginning to reoccupy areas of the park where they had been absent for over 30 years. Park visitors started reporting regular bear sightings, and the animals were becoming less fearful of human presence. The 1960s marked a turning point in bear recovery efforts. Park biologists began the first systematic studies of Smoky Mountains black bears, using radio collars and tracking techniques to understand their behavior, habitat needs, and population dynamics. They discovered that the park's recovering forests were providing excellent bear habitat, with diverse food sources and minimal human disturbance. The research revealed something remarkable. The Smoky Mountains bears were not just surviving, they were thriving. Female bears were producing larger litters and raising more cubs to independence than bears in many other regions. The population was growing at a rate of 3 to 5% annually, indicating that the habitat could support many more bears than anyone had thought possible. By 1970, the bear population had reached 600 animals, double what it had been just 20 years earlier. Bears were being sighted regularly throughout the park, and some were even venturing into surrounding areas where they hadn't been seen since the early 1900s. The success was attracting attention from wildlife biologists across the country who wanted to understand how such a dramatic recovery had been achieved. The 1980s brought new challenges and opportunities. As the bear population continued to grow, human-bear conflicts became more common. Bears were getting into garbage, damaging property, and occasionally threatening park visitors. Critics argued that the bear population had grown too large and needed to be reduced through hunting or relocation. But park managers took a different approach. Instead of reducing the bear population, they focused on managing human behavior. They implemented strict regulations about food storage, installed bear-proof garbage containers throughout the park, and launched education programs to teach visitors how to coexist safely with bears. The Bear Aware campaign became a model for wildlife management programs across the country. If this incredible story of wildlife recovery is inspiring you, hit that like button and subscribe to Forgotten Lands for more stories of impossible conservation successes. The results exceeded all expectations. By 1990, the Great Smoky Mountains black bear population had reached 800 animals, more than 4 times what it had been when the park was established. The bears were healthy, genetically diverse, and successfully reproducing throughout their historic range. What had once been considered an impossible conservation challenge had become one of the greatest wildlife recovery success stories in American history. The ecological benefits extended far beyond the bears themselves. As apex predators and ecosystem engineers, bears played crucial roles in seed dispersal, forest regeneration, and maintaining the balance of plant and animal communities. Their recovery helped restore the natural processes that had been disrupted by decades of human exploitation. The economic impact was equally impressive. Bear watching became one of the park's most popular activities, attracting millions of visitors annually and generating hundreds of millions of dollars in tourism revenue for surrounding communities. The same local officials who had once opposed bear conservation were now promoting the animals as essential to the region's economic prosperity. The scientific knowledge gained from the Smoky Mountains Bear Recovery Program became the foundation for bear conservation efforts across North America. Techniques developed in the park were used to restore bear populations in dozens of other locations, from the Adirondacks to the Pacific Northwest. The program demonstrated that even severely depleted wildlife populations could recover if given adequate protection and habitat. By 2000, the bear population had stabilized at approximately 1,500 to 1,900 animals, the highest density of black bears anywhere in the eastern United States. The park was supporting 2 bears per square mile, a population density that would have been considered impossible when the recovery effort began. Genetic studies showed that the population was healthy and diverse, with no signs of the inbreeding depression that had threatened the species in the early 1900s. The success attracted international attention. Wildlife biologists from around the world came to study the Smoky Mountains Bear Program, and the techniques developed there were adapted for use in bear conservation efforts in Europe, Asia, and other parts of North America. The park became a living laboratory for understanding how large mammal populations recover from near extinction. Perhaps most remarkably, the Bear Recovery Program helped change fundamental attitudes about wildlife conservation. The success demonstrated that conservation and economic development didn't have to be mutually exclusive, that protecting wildlife could actually enhance economic opportunities and improve quality of life for human communities. The critics who had dismissed bear conservation as a waste of money were witnessing something they had never thought possible. The dangerous nuisances had become beloved symbols of wilderness and natural heritage. The obstacles to progress had become engines of economic prosperity and sources of community pride. Today, as you drive through Great Smoky Mountains National Park, you're likely to see black bears foraging along roadsides, playing in meadows, or teaching their cubs to climb trees. The mountains that once seemed too damaged to support wildlife have become home to one of the most successful bear populations in North America. The transformation is visible everywhere, from the recovered forests that provide bear habitat to the bear-proof infrastructure that allows humans and bears to coexist safely. Visitors from around the world come specifically to see the bears that were once on the verge of extinction, generating economic benefits that far exceed the costs of conservation. The Great Smoky Mountains Black Bear Recovery Program proved that no wildlife population is ever truly beyond saving. From fewer than 150 survivors to nearly 2,000 thriving bears, from damaged habitat to recovered ecosystems, from local opposition to international recognition, the program demonstrated that conservation success is possible even under the most challenging circumstances. The bears that were once dismissed as obstacles to progress became symbols of what's possible when communities commit to long-term conservation goals. The mountains that were once too damaged to support wildlife became proof that ecosystems can recover if given the protection and time they need to heal. From near extinction to abundance, from local controversy to international acclaim, from economic liability to economic asset, the Great Smoky Mountains Black Bear Recovery story proves that sometimes the most important transformations happen not despite the skepticism and opposition, but because someone was willing to believe that recovery was always possible. The ripple effects of the Bear Recovery Program extended throughout the entire Appalachian region. Other national parks and wildlife refuges began implementing similar conservation strategies, using the Smoky Mountains program as a blueprint for their own wildlife recovery efforts. The techniques developed for managing human-bear conflicts became standard practice across North America. The research conducted on Smoky Mountains bears contributed to fundamental advances in wildlife biology and conservation science. Studies of bear behavior, habitat requirements, and population dynamics provided insights that were applied to conservation efforts for other large mammals around the world. The park became a training ground for wildlife biologists who would go on to lead conservation programs in dozens of other locations. The genetic recovery of the bear population was particularly remarkable. DNA analysis revealed that despite being reduced to fewer than 150 individuals, the population had maintained sufficient genetic diversity to support long-term viability. This discovery challenged previous assumptions about minimum viable population sizes and provided hope for other endangered species with small population sizes. The economic transformation of surrounding communities was equally dramatic. Towns that had once depended on logging and mining found new prosperity in bear-related tourism. Local businesses developed bear-watching tours, educational programs, and wildlife photography workshops that attracted visitors from around the world. The economic value of living bears far exceeded what dead bears had ever provided through hunting or fur trading. Today, the Great Smoky Mountains bear population serves as a living testament to the power of conservation. Visitors who see bears foraging peacefully in meadows or teaching their cubs to find food are witnessing the results of one of the most successful wildlife recovery programs in history. The bears that were once on the verge of extinction have become ambassadors for conservation, inspiring new generations of wildlife enthusiasts and conservationists. The transformation from near extinction to abundance, from habitat destruction to ecosystem recovery, from local opposition to international acclaim, dash the Great Smoky Mountains. Black Bear's story proves that with sufficient commitment, scientific knowledge, and community support, even the most challenging conservation goals can be achieved. The mountains that once seemed too damaged to support wildlife have become a beacon of hope for conservation efforts around the world.